Communication Error.
Welcome to episode 52 of the Communication Error podcast. This is the community patch notes episode of the state of indie games. I'm gonna call it Play More Indie Games. All right, that's going to be the title of this episode. But we need it to get some people that know way more about indie games than we do, because I clearly was wrong about a lot of things last week. So we brought in the All In Media Podcast, Seth and Eric. Welcome. Thanks for coming back. You both have been on the show before, but not together.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Hey, boys.
Yeah. Happy to be back. Happy to have a few more, communication errors of our own. Happy to get into some spirited debate about indie games.
Oh, there will be. There will be for sure.
Happy to alleviate you of any misconceptions you may have about the state of indie games, Johnny.
Well, I'm not. Okay, I was wrong. But also, I'm going to justify this. All right, I'm going to justify this by saying I had a few adult beverages that night, and my brain wasn't working right. All right, it just wasn't working right.
Whatever you got to tell yourself, man.
But also, before we get into this, I wanted to say I started watching basketball like this weekend because the playoffs are here, and I was watching the Denver Nuggets game a little bit, and I think Jokic is overrated. I mean,
Well, first, his name is Jokic, not Jokic. And second of all, he's going to be MVP probably.
I mean,
again
he's
this
not
year.
anywhere near as good as LeBron. Oh my God,
Look,
watching LeBron play was amazing.
Oh, yeah, when he really tires out in the fourth quarter and can't play anymore. That's not what this show is about. Don't get me sidetracked.
I love the way Johnny just immediately begins the episode trying to make Cheesy mad.
Yeah, that's
and then
we got to get in that
he wonders
mindset.
why people don't like him. Anyway, look, really what we need to be talking about is your 200th episode of the All In podcast. Congrats on that. Please tell people what it is that you do for those that don't know, and how you've been doing it for so long.
Well, adult beverages actually is not a bad way. No, Seth and I started All In back in 2020, and it was something that from the get-go that we both knew we wanted to be incredibly serious about. This is a project, this is a podcast that he and I put quite a bit of time into each and every week, researching, playing games for research. We do top fives and reviews and retrospectives and developer interviews, and we do all kinds of stuff. Definitely come and check us out at All In a Nintendo podcast. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We did just have our 200th episode, and we did quite a few things. We launched quite a few new things in honor of that, which I will toss over to my amazing co-host to talk about.
Yeah, sure. No, we 200 episodes is a big milestone, and we wanted to make sure that we celebrated. It's not, I mean, as you all know, it's not easy to do a podcast consistently. I think that the amount of podcasts that last 200 episodes, it's probably pretty slim, and the amount of them that do it with the same co-hosts the whole time is probably even slimmer.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it was a nice way to celebrate. We launched a new website, allin.media, which has like a bunch of new merch that Eric's wearing right now. He's got his polo, finally has a polo. Eric's wanted a polo for a long time. He's finally got it. We did that. We welcomed on, I mean, probably the biggest thing is we welcomed on a person onto our team, it's just been Eric and I this whole time for, 4 years now. And we kind of reached the limit of what two people can do, frankly. So we wanted to bring a third person in. We brought in a close friend and a cherished community member. His name's Matt. And we brought him in. We welcomed him into the team. He is you'll probably see him pop up on like the YouTube channel and streams and stuff from time to time, but primarily he's the producer of a new podcast that we also debuted that is hosted by him and myself called Bit Harmony, which is a podcast about video game music, which is now 2 episodes in, and the response has been very good and very kind. I think that's the bulk of the stuff that we announced for All In 200. We were cooking that stuff up for a while and getting things kind of ready. We like shadow dropped the first episode of Bit Harmony, and drop the merch and everything, like all during our big live stream we did for the first time ever, the full podcast live, the full like 3-hour ordeal live. And so that was cool too. It was nice. It was just a really good like celebration. 200 episodes. It was a big deal for us. So yeah,
How,
appreciate it.
with something like that, how do you keep it fresh, and how do you guys keep enjoying doing that week after week? Like, what's the secret for that?
Well, one of the things that we do is just with the segments, we try to change things up as much as possible. Obviously, with the top fives, we try to challenge ourselves each week to do something fun, to do something interesting. With our what we call kind of our main segment, our rotating segment, we try to keep that fresh and try to do something, kind of new and different each week, whether it be a retrospective, whether it be a full game review, whether it be, one of our kind of more obscure segments like our In Defense Of segments, or even a boomerang review or stuff like that. We always try to do new things. There is a structure, a method to the madness, but we go out of our way to make sure that what we do, the way that we put the podcast together isn't stale. Like even the way we structure the individual shows themselves, whether we put, where we kind of place the individual segments within the episode is something that, we talk about just to try to, again, as you said, just keep things fresh. But I think we've done a pretty good job of that over the past 4 years, over the past 200 episodes. And one of the biggest things that we've been able to do is to do it with so many amazing people. Both you have been on All In before. Thank you guys so much for joining us for that. And in addition to that, we've had the incredible opportunity to talk to so many other people within the industry, friends of ours, obviously, fellow podcasters, but also a ton of, creators within the Nintendo landscape, independent video game developers, and even people like Rowan Fox Noble, who do those amazing kind of aftermarket instructional booklets that he does. And, there's so many amazing interviews and people that we've had the opportunity to talk to over the past 4 years. That honestly alone has been worth doing this podcast this entire time for.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible what you guys have been able to do. So for any of the listeners, or even I don't know, if you're watching on YouTube, whatever, go check out All In Media Podcast. And I can't think of a better
Look for
group.
the spade.
Oh yeah, I mean the polo looks amazing. For those that can't see it, it looks great. Go check it out. Johnny and I, we can't think of anybody better to talk about indie games and your love of indie games. And I think what's really important about having you guys on is you actually have talked to indie developers on their games and how they're made and the time that is spent on them. And so with the conversation that we had last week, just talking about our own thoughts on indie games, you guys can give us some insight on what it's like for those indie developers. Before we get into that, though, Johnny, I don't think Seth was around when we started asking.
No,
the question.
I think he was. He might have been the first one.
He was like but I don't think we started asking the question with our first guest. Like if we go back and ask Crawler, who was our first guest, I don't think we asked.
You asked me.
Yeah,
you asked me.
That's Eric. I don't know. Seth,
I don't remember.
Well, we asked everybody.
I don't want to ask Seth because I think I already know the answer. But
okay.
Go ahead, Johnny. Take it away.
So we asked. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we asked you this. We always ask the guests, what game do you prefer, Super Mario World or Super Mario Bros. 3?
We did get into this.
Oh, we
Super
did.
Mario Bros.
You were
3.
so you might have been the first one. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all right. So I thought of another question because I figured we could ask them something else. I don't want to ask the same question and get the same answer unless they're both Super Mario Bros. 3. Then I'll take the win twice. But since we're talking about indie games, I know this is gonna be a difficult one to answer. What's your favorite indie game?
Oh man, you go ahead, Eric. I know Eric's favorite indie game on the Switch.
Yeah, the one that I've told people for the longest time that is my favorite indie game on the Switch is, in fact, the product of our very first ever guest on All In back in episode 1. We did an indie showcase on an amazing indie title called Wandersong, of which this cute little guy is the main character, the bard. And I just found Wandersong to be so incredibly affecting, so unique, so bright, so vibrant, so colorful, so well written, and so much gameplay variety. There's a couple tweaks that you could argue could be made to the game to polish it up a little bit more, but it is such an incredibly special experience. And honestly, for me, one of my best arguments just for indie games in general.
Man, it's such a hard question to answer. I have so many titles like dancing through my head right now. If I gotta pick just one, it's SteamWorld Heist is up there. Eric's pointing to SteamWorld Heist in his background. It's up there. But if I have to pick just one, it's probably Night in the Woods.
Cheesy hates that game. He said it's a terrible game.
I didn't say it's terrible. It's just not for me.
Yeah, I love that game, and I have a really deep personal attachment to that game too. We can get into that if you guys want to.
When is the sequel coming out? There is a sequel coming out, right?
It's
A
kind of
pseudo
in flux.
sequel, yeah.
It's in flux because it's called Revenant Hill. Unfortunately, Scott, the lead artist and designer on that game and of Night in the Woods, has a pretty serious heart condition that he came down with, and so he's kind of in and out of hospital, unfortunately, and it's kind of unclear if they're even going to be able to make that game at all anymore.
Oh wow.
So we'll see. But Night in the Woods is a very in terms of human experiences, just somebody's life experience and emotions writ large and put into a video game. It almost doesn't get stronger than Night in the Woods. The people that made that game put their entire being into that game. It's very, very special. So yeah, if I had to pick just one, it's probably that.
Wow. All right.
So are you excited for SteamWorld Heist 2?
Oh, dude, I can't wait. I cannot wait. I love that game.
I texted him after the announcement just to make sure he was okay.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. SteamWorld Heist 1, that's probably top 10, top 15 indie games. It's really, really excellent. I've played through that whole game several times. And SteamWorld Heist 2, that was a dream announcement for me. People were like, "Oh, Silksong." SteamWorld Heist 2 is above Silksong for me. Personally, I take that over Silksong.
I think that's a good point to start this off. Actually, you know what? Before we start it, I want to do some housekeeping because we did get a new patron, and I do want to shout them out. The name's Jer joined as a member, so thank you for supporting us. And then also we still have Jeff Trevania, Mikey, and oh my God, I am blanking.
Always prepared, Johnny. Always prepared.
Thank you, new patrons, for bringing some order to the communication error.
Hold on, I got it.
Eric is more prepared, and he's not even the regular host of this show.
You can have that soundbite.
Wooly, Wild Wooly. Thank you for your continued support. And make sure you leave reviews on Apple and Spotify. Leave a like on YouTube. Check out the Patreon. And follow us on all our socials. There we go. But getting into Silksong and it not being at the Indie Showcase, I don't think it belongs there anymore.
I agree.
For Silksong, it's more in the mainstream, and also I don't need to see another trailer of Silksong. I just need to know when it's coming out. I just need a date. So there's nothing more they could show me that I want to see. I just want the date. And I think not being at the Indie Showcase gave other games like SteamWorld Heist a time to shine. I know it sucks that they because I think another Crab's Treasure, they tweeted out a picture of them trying to release another Crab's Treasure, but then they have Hades 2 on one side and they have Silksong on the other side. So it's hard to navigate for indies among these bigger indie games that are kind of more mainstream.
Well, it's not just indie games. It's really all games. There's so many games coming out that you can
Right.
kind of make that argument in general, regardless of what level the studios are making them, in my opinion.
What is the reason that you guys think that Hollow Knight is so big for what it is? Because one, it's an indie game, which a lot of people don't give chances to, and two, it's a Metroidvania, and those don't really sell that well. So it's kind of weird that we have this one game that everybody is so excited for, the next game, Silksong, but I can't figure out why that is. Like, Hollow Knight is an amazing game. Don't get me wrong.
That's
But
part of it.
just like the two of it, or like the two things that I mentioned don't go together, it feels. So what's the secret sauce there?
Well, for Silksong specifically, they announced the existence of Silksong years ago, and you're absolutely right. Hollow Knight is an incredibly quality title.
Yeah.
So much so that the people who have played it have been, really chomping at the bit for many years to get the sequel. And the announcement of the sequel just kind of further perpetuated the conversation about Silksong, getting more people to go back and play it, in turn creating more people excited for the next game. But Silksong has reached this weird place where it's been in development for so long. It's retained this almost kind of mythic status of when will it finally be released. It's been on the docket. It's been in the oven for so long. It's been part of the conversation for so long that, the kind of when will it, when won't it conversation about the game has become kind of part of the allure and part of the internet memeability, essentially, of the title.
So what you're saying is it's the real Rachel and Ross of video game controversy.
They were on a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're with Ross on that one, huh, Seth?
They were on a break. Yeah. Well, so it's funny that Eric used that.
I know that.
It's funny that Eric used the mythic. I was literally going to say mythology is the reason it's so. It's because people love that story. People like to be excited about something. People like to come into an indie world saying it's the Smash Brothers thing. Every direct, what Smash character when, where was Smash? Where was people like looking for something. People like anticipating something. And when it comes to Hollow Knight, like, I wonder what percentage of people who are out there typing Silksong in the chat every indie world have actually even played Hollow Knight. Like, I think they just like, I think they like anticipating something. If y'all remember Duke Nukem Forever, that game sucks. It's awful. But like everybody bought it because like there was that mythology around it. It was like the Guinness World Record holder for like longest game in development or whatever, like,
But it's MIA. Hollow Knight Silksong is basically the cryptid of the video game industry at this point. It's the Bigfoot, it's the Loch Ness Monster, and those are always going to interest people. Does it exist? Does it not exist? When will it show its face? Somebody said, my uncle at Nintendo said they saw a photo of it a couple months ago.
Well, now it's on the Xbox storefront. There's a page there.
Mm-hmm.
That advertising does itself. So like they're in the perfect spot. Whenever it releases, it's gonna sell like hotcakes.
They don't have to advertise anything, dude.
Yeah.
They don't have to do a thing for Hollow Knight Silksong. They have got people so hungry. They've given them so little over the years that it doesn't matter. Like when they're at this place where like, and I think they know this. Whenever they almost have to give either a hard release date or a total shadow drop at this point. Like when they show it, like whenever they roll that out again, they can't just say 2024. Like they can't do that, and I think they know that, So like that's another layer to it. The fact that they've been so quiet the entire time is also like, because people are so hungry, they'll take any little crumb they can. They're looking at the Xbox website, they're looking at the Australian rating boards, and South Korea rated it last week, and so. It's crazy. I mean, they have people in a headlock.
But I do think for many, many people, it has been too long. And there are a lot of people that were very much chomping at the bit for Silksong to come out, whose excitement really has kind of dissipated just because, they've allowed themselves to be excited for so long and they're just kind of exhausted at this point. Now, I'm not saying that is the majority opinion at this point. I'm just saying they may want to do it sooner rather than later before too many more of those people start to become kind of disenchanted with the idea of this game they've been excited for years, just perpetually being a no-show.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they should release the game earlier, release it unfinished. I'm just saying, give people something.
Yeah. But you don't want to give them too much, right? Or do you at this point?
You do at this point. Absolutely, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in
I
my
think it
opinion,
was
at least.
announced in like 2019, wasn't it?
I think it was announced
That
back in
sounds
like
right.
1794, if I'm not mistaken. If you guys wanna Google that
was
and
early.
fact check me on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
it was
that's
a long time ago.
that's part of the problem with Silksong and games like Metroid Prime 4. You announce them 5 years ago and you don't show them, for the 5 years. People are gonna be upset. So it's like
I
a
will say,
fine
though,
line.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say, though, thankfully, Silksong is not the only indie game out there, and that is very much an outlier when it comes to many things when it comes to indie games. We are incredibly blessed in this day and age to be like just really just I mean, it's insane the amount of quality independent games and the amount of talent within the independent game landscape, the incredibly unique and affecting and beautiful experiences that are out there. It's really never been a better time to be an independent creator, really across the board in terms of all forms of media. The accessibility of the industry, as difficult as it is to maintain a foothold in this industry, making a video game has never been easier. And we are seeing just well springs of talent pop up all over the world. So, for those people who are done waiting on Silksong, there's about 50 billion other games that we could point you to.
Yeah, and so you bring up games, and this was something that Johnny and I were talking about last week, is the conversation of what is an indie game. I think a lot of people get confused as to what is and what isn't. I know Johnny and I still do. Like, we were talking, like, technically Fortnite is an indie game. Now, they've made a ton of money now, and so they probably wouldn't be considered indie, but they
Stardew Valley,
were. Yeah, Stardew Valley. And so the other part of the conversation that we had was, and you guys have talked to indie developers, so I don't know how they feel, but do you want to have the title of this is an indie game? Should it matter that it's an indie game, or is it just a video game? Like, having indie in there means that it was created by an independent developer. I get that. But is that turning people away because they hear the word indie and think that it's going to be lesser quality? I'm not saying it is, but just from an outside perspective.
That could certainly be the case for some people. Now, for Seth and myself, an indie game or any game kind of describing itself as indie, we're so obsessed with indie games that if I hear just the word indie game, I'm automatically a little bit more interested anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think there are always going to be people who are of the mindset that if it's not, built in Unreal 5, if it didn't have a $300 million budget, if it didn't come from one of the big AAA studios, then this game isn't going to be worth my time. I think there's always going to be people who are going to be of that mindset. But I do think that we are changing the minds of large portions of the industry in that regard.
I think that's true. And I think it's also, I think that we are in an interesting place right now because for a couple of reasons, the AAA, whole model is like imploding right now.
Yeah. You and I had a very good conversation about that, Cheesy and Shiny.
We did. Yeah. Go check that episode out. It was really good.
Yeah. So I mean, like it's kind of imploding a little bit right now. And so what you're seeing is a combination of like sort of disinterest, I think, from a lot of people. I think more and more people are becoming interested in indie games because AAA games are kind of either not hitting, or the AAA games that do come out are belumbered with, negative press like layoffs and stuff like this, which is just an unfortunate reality of where we've come with the unsustainability of the AAA game development cycle. It's going to blow up. It just is. And indie games are kind of at this place where you do because of that, you have a wider and wider ocean of what indie game means. Something
Right.
like Another Crab's Treasure is like a larger indie game, in quotes, like a higher profile indie game that has a higher price tag or whatever than something like, you know, this game Radarinth coming out this week for $5 by East Asia Soft, you know, like there's a wide breadth of difference between what an indie game is and can be. Personally, for me, I really like that. I really like that indie can mean a bunch of different things. I like that it means that, like, hey, this is just something that this dude made in a weekend and released for, you know, whatever, $3 or something like that. Or it could be, hey, this team like got together and they all lived in the same house and they like put this thing out there that's very like heartfelt and personal. Or it could be, you know, something like Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, which comes out and that game's like $40, and that's like kind of, you're almost like getting up to the AAA level in terms of price, in terms of length, and things like this. I like that indies kind of have that wide spread personally, to that end, like I don't necessarily on a personal level look at indies and say like this is an indie. I look at it more as like this is a video game, but I think that when communicating about them, it's important to have those delineations for people. So.
Now, I do understand that there can definitely be some confusion when it comes to what constitutes an indie game, because I think for something like a Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, if that had come out on the Nintendo Wii or something, it would have just been labeled like a AA release or something like that. But you also have, you know, this idea. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we got this new quote unquote AAA initiative. These independent studios and publishers who have gotten to this point where they kind of feel that they are still independent, but kind of on another level. So the muddiness and the grayness of the definition of indie, I can certainly understand if it confuses some people. And just like Seth said, there is a very wide berth. It's a very wide ocean with a big jacket.
Yeah, because
Nice.
I brought up Devolver Digital because that's a publisher, right?
Yes.
So are the games that they publish still considered independent, or are they something else?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Devolver Digital, you know, as you just said, is a publisher. It's, you know, they're not doing this in-house like something like a Sony or a Nintendo is. In many respects and in many cases, they are finding these small indie teams who are making the games, and they're just simply bringing the games to the people. That's the entire point of what the publisher is. But the games themselves do absolutely still qualify as indie. They are made with a relatively low budget, with a relatively small team. Again, not the $300 million budgets that you see from something like, you know, a Nintendo, a Sony, a Microsoft, who consistently have, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of people working on these titles. Like even something like a Plucky Squire still has a relatively small budget and a relatively small team behind it compared to, you know, many of the bigger studios.
Yeah. Devolver is an interesting one, right? Because Devolver is at the higher end
Yes.
of like it, in terms of exposure and things like this, but they are still like an independent publisher of independent games. Devolver has an interesting history. They started off as a Gamecock Media, which published games for the Nintendo DS, games that you've heard of, like Dementium and Moon and stuff like that. Those like game, and that studio would become a TUI later on. They used to be, what was it? Is it Rebel Kid?
Renegade Kid.
Renegade Kid. They used to be Renegade Kid back on the DS. That was just a few people. You know, that was like 4 or 5 people making games like Dementium 2, Moon, and stuff like this, being published by a publisher that would become Devolver. Well, on the DS, we didn't have a concept of like indie games, but that's an indie game. You know,
They called it DSiWare.
Well, like even those weren't DSiWare games, right? Like those
That's
were
true.
physically produced games
true.
on cartridge. And despite that, like to your point, Eric, if we were talking about something like this in the era of the Wii or something, before we had the capability of stuff like digital storefronts, those games are like by everything else but name still indie games. You know, so like, what is it? Is it this? Is it the size of the team? Is it the size of the publisher? Is it the fact that this is digital versus physical? Because many indie games get physical releases now too. So, you know, like the definition is very hazy. You know, it's interesting for us as podcasters and content creators because we have to talk about it and we have to educate people, you know, and that's sort of our charge to talk to people and you know, communicate it. It's the charge of people like Nintendo who do their indie world showcases to say, hey, this is an indie game or whatever. But it's a very interesting position to be in because it's a very hazy thing. So yeah, I don't know. Indie games are in a very interesting and exciting place right now. But I think the definition is very broad. Devolver though, indie publisher of indie games, for sure.
So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to something that I think misspoke, or I was just wrong on it. Maybe, I don't know. And I'd like to get your opinion on it. So I had said that, like, I was talking about Pepper Grinder, and Pepper Grinder is like a 4-hour game for
Sure.
$15, right? And I'm like, I wouldn't recommend it for that price point because of the length. Do you ever feel like you're obligated to recommend, like, does value ever come into it when
Always
playing a
comes
game?
into it. Yeah, it always comes
Interesting.
into it.
Go ahead, Eric. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, with Pepper Grinder, it's weird that you bring up Pepper Grinder. We're actually going to be speaking to that game's developer this week on the show.
Nice.
But
Don't tell him I said that.
but when it comes to a game's value, there's a lot of things that go into that. It's, you know, the length, but also, you know, how fun, how enjoyable is a game. You could very well make the argument that there are a lot of indie games out there that only take a couple hours that I would happily buy for $20, $30, even $40 just because of how much I enjoyed them. But yeah, the length of the game does need to factor into the value. And this is, I think, another one of the reasons that we're seeing a little bit of an implosion. Well, a complete implosion at the AAA space is they've taken this idea of hours equals value way too far to the extreme. And you have these games that you can sink hundreds and hundreds of hours into, but so much of it is fluff. There is something about a much more focused, straightforward experience that I do really like. And a game should be what it is. For something like a Pepper Grinder, I think 4 hours is, you know, for what it is. When you go through the game, I think it feels like the correct length for that game. It doesn't sound very long, but when you're playing through it, it feels like you're getting a full game. You are getting a complete game experience with something like Pepper Grinder. You know, I'm not watching the clock while I'm playing it. I'm just enjoying myself. I'm going through world after world after world of these really interestingly created and really uniquely mechanical stages. And then all of a sudden I beat the game, and it turns out that it didn't take quite as long as I thought it did. Now, do I dock the game points for that, or do I think it has less value for that? I don't.
Yeah.
Yes, Seth.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It's the kind of, it's because value is so subjective, right?
Yep.
$15 means a different thing to me than it means to Cheesy or Johnny or Eric, right? It's different for everybody. And I mean that in both terms of monetary value and the value of your time. I don't have hundreds of hours laying around to play, you know, to sink into all of these games. So a really good, like, 4-hour experience like Pepper Grinder, that for me was all killer, no filler for those 4 hours. Just awesome the whole time. Like, I will take an awesome 4 hours over a middling 40 hours, you know? And that's where I come at it with that. And for me, an experience like that is worth $15. Now, when it comes to our jobs as content creators to talk to people, all we can do is lay those facts out and just say, hey, this is what it is. And we can give our opinion of like, hey, I feel this is overpriced, or I think you should maybe consider wish listing this or whatever. Because I understand that value is in the eye of the beholder, and I understand that value is going to be different for everybody. All we can do is state the facts. This is a 4-hour game that costs $15. I think it's worth it. You might disagree with me. So that's all good. Like, decide that for yourself and make your purchasing decision from there. All I can do is tell you how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
And if you only
it's
have
interesting.
a $60 video game budget for the next 6 months anyway, yeah, maybe you do want to go out and you want to get a Starfield or a Red Dead Redemption 2 because it is something that you can sink a ton of time into. Maybe you don't want to sink, a quarter of your video game budget for the next half year into something that you're probably going to beat in a few hours. That plays into the value as well.
Or give Vampire Survivors, it's $5 and you're good for like 10 years.
Well, and can we say too, this is something that I don't feel like gets said enough in video games discourse. Video games are a luxury hobby.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
a luxury.
They should be so much more.
Well, this is a we pay a premium for video games. It's a luxury hobby, right?
Mhm.
This is not video games are not essential. No matter what hyperbolic thing you might say in a YouTube comment of like this game, is the reason I'm alive or whatever. No, it's not. It's video games are a hobby, right? And you can be very passionate about that hobby, and I am. I do it for a living. I love video games, but they are a hobby. And if you are really so bent out of shape about like, I can't, pay $5 more, like how am I going to pay $5 more for Pepper Grinder is $15 and this game's $10 or whatever? Like, are we really splitting hairs over the cost of your Starbucks coffee in the morning? Like if we're at that place, if it is that dire, then like you should probably rethink your financial situation altogether. Or is it that you just want something negative to say? Is it just that you want a sticking point to argue about?
So I won't, I didn't agree with Johnny when he was talking about.
When do you ever
basically-
agree? Like, have you ever agreed?
Probably not. But
But he did
Well,
want to
you-
make sure to specifically make sure you,
yeah, I
he was
just
throwing
need,
you under the bus.
just need everybody to know I disagree with you. But basically, what you were saying was that $1 an hour is how much that game.
Okay, so
should
this is where the
be
adult
valued. No,
beverages
wait.
come in. This is where the adult because like I was trying to be sarcastic on that. Like it didn't come off as sarcastic because
Did
that's
you have
what
a
people.
few pepper grinders? And it was just,
Yeah,
But that's what that's like people. That's like a common like conception people have that $1 like if a $60 game should get you like 60 hours of
I've heard that
playtime.
before. Yeah.
But like what I was comparing it to is, Princess Peach is a 6 to 8 hour experience or whatever, and you're paying $60 for it. Like, isn't that over? I feel like that's overpriced.
But okay, also, you did bring up a good point that, again, I don't know if I agree with, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. We brought up movies, and you're watching a movie that's 2 hours, maybe 2.5, 3 hours long, and it's a $15
Oh my
ticket.
God.
I gotta go to. I know I'm going to the wrong movie theater.
Man, they're gouging.
But all indie games are different prices. So in all games in general are different prices. So it's not like that. Like how movies are, they're all ticketed at one price. So does that mean that it has different value compared to some of these other games? Like how do you price those? And I think that's where people are getting upset is like one game is worth this, one game is worth that. If it's worth less, then it's probably a lesser experience in their mind.
Well, I mean, very possibly. When it comes to movies, I mean, movies are just uninteractive pieces of
Mhm.
art. There are, so many, there are so vastly different ways that you can measure the quality of a movie versus the quality of a video game. But when it comes to independent games specifically, you talk about the differentiating prices. Yeah, if you're going to go see, a big budget, $200 million like Marvel blockbuster, the ticket's probably going to be the same as if it was, a relatively small production rom-com or something like that. Whereas on the video game side, you talk about a Super Princess Peach, which is a full retail release at a full retail price. But I think that's another one of the reasons that so many people have started to look more toward the independent landscape because the average price of indie games is so much smaller.
Yeah. it's also funny because like we're not having these conversations about books and movies and like going. I didn't go to a museum.
I can't
and
believe
say,
I
like,
paid $25 for a book that was this many pages.
yeah, I can't believe I read that in 2 sittings. Oh my god, you know.
Well,
it's
what's weird
crazy.
about
It's not
books
worth
though
it.
is you can get them for different prices. Not you can get the same book for different prices, depending on the
Yeah.
media, like the hardcover,
And I can-
paperback, or digital. Like they all have different
Yeah.
prices.
And I can go to the art museum on the weekend price where it's, you know, $5 less, and I can't believe I only got an hour out of that museum experience. You know, it's just like when you apply this logic to other forms of art, it's a little silly. And I think that like at least some of it comes from a sense of entitlement that I think gamers also get from consuming their media. Is like if I'm putting this much into it, what I perceive as this much, I better get this much out, you know. And that is all, it's like all subjective metrics, and that's the unfortunate thing. If I went to the movies, like I'm very selective. I don't know how y'all are. I'm very selective about the movies I go and see in the theater. If I'm going to the theater and I'm paying whatever it is, $15 for a ticket, like I probably have a pretty good idea if I like that movie, if I'm gonna like that movie first. You know, I've read reviews, I've, you know, heard early buzz or whatever. So like why should it be any different from video games? Like do your research and come in and listen to people like us or people that you trust, their opinions on, and do your research beforehand so you don't know if you don't feel like you're going to get burned by however much you're going to pay for it. You know, like how is it any different? I didn't go to, it's very rare that I go to a movie and I do all the work to see a movie, pay the price for it, and walk out being like, well, that movie sucked. You know, it's rare because I do a lot of research beforehand, you know. And so I feel like you should take the same approach for video games. You know, do your research and, you know, find the people whose opinions you align with and stick with that, you know, navigate it.
Yeah, Johnny, do you feel like your opinion has changed a little bit? Because when you were also talking about it, you're somebody that buys a lot of games. You have a collection, but then you don't play like the full experience of that game. So even your argument last week of saying that how much time it is to play that game is how much the value should be, you never like finish and see the credits. Not never, because you do.
Well, yeah,
But
I
there are
get. So I
some
get
that
my
are-
whatever. Whenever I'm satisfied with a game, and that's when I stop. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not one of these
And
people
that's fair. Yeah. There are people out there that, you know, is like, you know what? I'm good. I haven't seen the credits. I haven't beat the game, but you know what? I feel like I've gotten everything I want to get out of this game. Like, that's fair.
Yeah, so if I'm satisfied, you know, I probably shouldn't have said that because I play so many games, but as a creator, like I'm fortunate to be able to have all these games, and I know you know, consumers and listeners, they're probably, you know, you don't want to buy every single game that is released, and I don't want to recommend a game that, you know, they'll end up hating because they're like, oh, this was only 4 hours. Why would you recommend this to me? But, you know, there are times where, you know, I'll recommend a game if I don't even get the full experience, like you said, because I know I enjoyed it for a certain amount of time.
Well, I'll throw this back on you. What are some of your favorite indies?
So all the roguelikes, Vampire Survivors, Balatro, Dead Cells, Hades, like roguelikes
Games with replayability.
yeah, games with replayability. And then also puzzle games. I found like Stitch just came out. I really enjoy Stitch. And I think that is definitely worth. There's a lot of content there. There's a lot of things you could do. It's an easy pick up and play game. I would recommend that every day of the week. But yeah, it's a lot of games that have that replayability that like Pepper Grinder doesn't really have. You beat the game, and there's something else. I guess you get better times and there's collectibles, but that's pretty much it. You're not. It's not like Hades where you keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Even that though is subjective. When I was a kid, dude, I can't tell you the amount of times I maxed out the clock on Kingdom Hearts 1. Like I put thousands of hours into Kingdom Hearts 1. When I was a kid, like I got games on Christmas and my birthday. That was it.
Yep.
And like, so I beat the crap out of everything that I played. You know, like I did nothing but play those games until there was nothing, literally nothing left to do. And then I would just, there's some games, something like a Jet Set Radio Future, I'll just turn that on just to skate around in the open world. So like the amount of hours that I've gotten out of is probably more than the average person. And so it's impossible to determine like what is going to hit for somebody versus like what's not. The amount of times that I've played through a short hike, you know, Eric, talk about
such a good game.
So great. Like that's like, you know, you can get through that game in just a couple of hours, but like I'll go back to that like once a year and just replay it, you know. So it's a totally like and like Johnny was saying, like there are also people who like they reach a certain point, they're like, cool, I'm good. You know, that point is different for everybody. So it's a really impossible metric to hold any game to, especially in like a constantly evolving landscape like indie games are right now, especially in a landscape where they're kind of having to fill a hole that AAA is leaving behind a little bit. So it's a really impossible yardstick to hold indie games to try to determine value or hours. Yeah, there's sites like How Long to Beat that are kind of like a, you know, an average or an aggregate of what people are reporting their play times were. But I mean, it could be totally different, you know, for everybody. So it's very, very hard to determine what that's going to be. And then like taste is another completely subjective thing. It's something that I struggle with a lot as a content creator, because I feel like I'm always having to be like, hey, this game that I really like, it's not going to be for everybody. It's not going to be for everybody. Like Hypnospace Outlaw, one of my favorite games of all time. That game is not going to be for everybody. That is a very weird, very strange game that most people that have bought that game based on like my recommendation or whatever are like, yo, that game sucks. I hated it. You know? And I'm like, I get it. Like, I get it. Anybody who does not like Hypnospace Outlaw, I completely get it. You know, Analgesic Games, this is my favorite independent developer, you know, making stuff like Anodyne 2 and even The Ocean and Stephanie. These are some of my favorite indie games, but they're not going to be for everybody. But like, they hear me talk about it and they hear how much I like it, and they're like, oh, well, if Seth likes it, I'm totally going to like it. It's like, no, that you don't understand. These things are very subjective. So like, it's really tough to determine what's going to hit for everybody, you know? Yeah. So like the best thing I can do is just kind of lay it out there, tell you what it is, and let you know, and trust sort of the consumer's intelligence, you know?
And I will say that Seth and I do have a very large kind of overlapping. The Venn diagram of our individual tastes and our individual interests in video games does overlap quite a bit. But, you know, just talking about Stephanie, talking about Analgesic and Anodyne 2. Anodyne 2, we did an indie showcase on. I personally had a couple fairly strong reservations about the game. So, I mean, it is completely subjective. And I will say that when it comes to that idea of value, there are a lot of studios out there that are attempting to specifically tackle that idea of intrinsic value in their game with exactly what you were just talking about, Johnny. This idea of being a roguelike or having roguelike elements, because those games are seen to just have intrinsically more replayability. And the more replayability, the more reasons you give people to turn the game on, the more quote unquote intrinsic value it's going to have. That's one of the reasons you see so many things becoming roguelikes. I mean, just a couple episodes ago, for episode 200, we brought back Greg Lobanov, who admitted that like he just added a roguelike element to his upcoming Beastie Ball. He wound up playing Balatro and wound up adding a new roguelike element to his game. So that's one of the big things. And I mean, there are a lot of people that are arguing that because of this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to intrinsic value, that there are way too many roguelikes on the market. But as long as they keep things fresh and as long as they feel different, I mean, I don't think there's too many yet, but there are certainly quite a few of them. But that is one kind of big catch-all solution that many indie devs and indie publishers are going to for themselves answer this whole value question.
Yeah, so I guess if we're going to shift a little bit, like, do you guys ever talk to developers who are talking about trying to, I don't know, I guess like make games for the times, like you were just saying that they just added a roguelike experience to their game.
Hmm.
But is that the best way for your games to be seen? Because we talked about how most indie games aren't seen unless there's some kind of online like compatibility with it, where big streamers are streaming the game. Like, how do people get indie games to be seen and for these developers to be seen and to
Marketing.
have their games played? And yeah, so when it comes to marketing, and because Johnny and I don't know this side of it, like that's a ton of money to market, right? Like, what is it? Do you guys know how much it is to be in a indie direct, or like have they ever talked to you about that?
Well, it's not something that we've ever heard. Like there's an exchange of money or anything to be in an indie direct, or like a Wholesome Games Direct, the Day of the Devs, the Triple I Initiative, or anything like that. I wasn't ever aware of any instances of money changing hands
And maybe
for
there's
something like
maybe
that.
there's not. I don't know, but
But when
I
it comes
just
specifically
assume-
to marketing your games, like these are game developers, these aren't marketers. So for a lot of people, that's not an aspect of the business that comes naturally to them, or as at least not as naturally as just the simple act of making the games themselves. And just marketing your game is something that a lot of people struggle with. The lack of marketing is something that is going to continue to hurt a lot of really interesting and promising games. And that's one of the big duties of the publishers, is to kind of be on the lookout for, really interesting ideas, for promising young games and promising young talents, because that is one of their major functions. Publishers are supposed to cover a lot of the marketing for these games. And a lot of that does have to do with social media, YouTube videos, because even Devolver Digital doesn't have millions of dollars to market even the most anticipated new titles. But I think what I've told people in the past is, I really think if you are really actively trying to make your game as successful as it possibly can be, and to try to get a foothold, if independent game dev is not just a side hustle for you, hey, let me spend a few hours on the weekend, throw my game out there, and maybe, get a few sales, maybe enough to buy myself a new office chair or something like that. If you're trying to get a foothold in the industry, I really think, and this may sound insane, you need to spend half your time making your game, half your time marketing your game.
Yeah, and I think like there are some devs that are good at it. Like Another Crab's Treasure, I think is really good at it. They have a pretty good presence on social media, like TikTok.
And they do have a specific person to do that. But yes, I agree.
Yeah, so those games that have the marketing, like those games tend to do better, or they're seen, or they're the higher profile ones, like Seth was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think us as content creators, we're a vital part of their marketing as well, and just showing their titles, and you guys do a great job of it. I actually buy a lot of my games, a lot of the indie games that you have on your channel, because I want to know about them. Just like the Indie Direct, I want to have known about Stitch or these other games coming out like Europa and some of the other stuff that was shown in there, without having that little bit of advertisement. So I think they have to market. They have to figure out a way to get eyes on their project.
Yeah, it's the eternal struggle, because there's so many out there.
Yeah, it is. It's. I mean, and there's only going to be more. I mean, there's so many games releasing every single week. Visibility is huge, and I do think that just like everything else about the landscape is changing, marketing is too. I mean, one of the best ways, as you mentioned, Johnny, is to work with like content creators. Is to a big streamer covering your game. Like that's how something like Suika Game became what it was. Is because big streamers latched onto it. It's not because Suika Game had commercials at an indie world. Like that had nothing to do with it. It was big streamers got a hold of Suika Game and it blew up. You know, that's how games like Among Us blew up. That's how Fortnite blew up, you know. So like that's really key to, you know, like traditional games media and games journalism is nowhere near as important as content creators and streamers anymore. It's just that's just the way things have shifted. Um, and for our part, whenever we're, you know, putting stuff up on like our YouTube channel, for example, we spotlight indie games all the time. It's a massive part of what we do. And it is a curated thing of like what I think the audience will want to see. It's very rare that I like select a game that I think is going to be like bad. We get emails all the time of people like, "Hey, like check out this game that we're putting out or whatever." I'll look at the trailer or something like, you know, and I'll politely decline. So I try to curate for the experience to people like you, Johnny, who come to the channel and they are learning about new indie games. I try to make sure that the stuff that I'm showing them is stuff they want to see, you know, or should want to see. You know, when we cover a game in an indie showcase on our podcast, we make sure that it is something that we can recommend, you know, or at least one of us can. Or if there's like a, you know, a good discussion that could be like, I love Jump King, Eric does not love Jump King. So like we had a good discussion about something like that. So in that case, we'll sort of go there too. But it's you know, it's all in the service of like visibility. When we invite developers, you know, onto our show or onto our channel or whatever, it's all for the service of visibility. And that stuff for them is free. It just costs them time, right? Whereas something like Anton Blast, right, which a lot of people learned that Anton Blast was even a thing because of this new indie world. That game's been in development for over 2 years. We had the creative director of our show on our show over 2 years ago. Back to the Kickstarter, like the whole thing. That game's been a thing, and they've done, by the way, the convention circuit. They've been to the PAXs. They've paid the tens of thousands of dollars for booths at various PAXs, and still, people are only just learning about it this past week. You know, so like it's one of those things. It's like, man, like you can really do all the right things. You can, and they have a great social media presence too.
Yeah, they
and
do.
It's like. So it's like you can do all the right things and it still might not work, you know? It's you have the deck stacked against you extraordinarily. Balatro, this comes to mind because I just used the word deck. Balatro was an interesting case because that game dropped its demo on Steam Next Fest and the full game was out like a week later. So like it let its own word of mouth be its marketing. Balatro never showed up at any of these presentations, you know? So you have to be creative about the way you're sort of like activating these little things. Cause even if you do everything right by the like traditional method, it still might not work, you know?
Like Captain Picard says, it is possible to make no mistakes and still fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, is it difficult for them to make a demo? Because you would think that with the Indie World Showcase, all those games should have demos to get more people playing them, or at least have an idea of how they play, or when they come out, if they can wish list it. But not all the games do. So is that like different to make a demo? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that is something that we constantly say when they dropped 3 demos at last week's Indie World Showcase. They dropped the Anton Blast demo. They dropped the Europa demo. And we made videos for each one of them, for Europa, for Anton Blast, for Cat Quest. And this is something that whenever we see a demo, we make a point, and I personally make a point of saying, if you have the ability to make a demo, you should, because it is such a great tool for selling your game. If you can give people a little taste and give people an actual feel for what the game is, you will convert so many sales. So if there are any other indie devs out there, if you have the option or have the ability to make a demo, I personally think it is a zero risk, all reward, endeavor to make.
What surprised me about Anton Blast is the demo came out that day, and then the full release isn't until November.
Nope.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we'll probably have another indie showcase, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's not the last we're going to hear of Anton Blast before the game comes out.
Yeah. it's a weird thing too, because it does cost, time and resources to produce a demo. So it isn't zero risk. It does take, time and money. You have to pay people to carve out a vertical slice and make a demo. In addition to that, not every game demos well. Not every game translates super well to a demo. Europa is a good example. Like, I played the demo for Europa and I was like, this is like interesting, but I don't feel like I really got a good sense of what the game is. My life is no different having played that demo and not, like that made a net neutral impact on my life and my interest in the game.
What were you expecting from it? Just out of curiosity.
Just a better taste of what the actual game is. Something that kind of gave me a window into what I can expect from the full experience. And like, that was, whatever, 15, 20 minutes of like running around in the world and, jumping and flying around. That's like all it was. And maybe that is all the game is. Right?
I think that is what it is.
Maybe.
Like when I was playing it, I actually feel the opposite, where I was like, okay, I understand that this game is going to be something like Greece.
Sure.
Where it's just jumping around from platform. Maybe there's a couple of puzzles, but it's more about the environment and the story that you're learning along the way.
Yeah.
Totally. I'll say though that like they play the trailer at the end of the
Better
demo.
say, yeah, they tease a little bit more variety in the trailer.
I'm like, where was all of this? You like, I'm like, where? Like, I wanted like, yeah, show me these puzzles, show me some of this stuff, So like for me, I played that and I was like, okay, like, fine. So I do think that there's such a thing as a game that just doesn't demo well, where a vertical slice just doesn't necessarily sell the game appropriately. If you cut out a vertical slice of Hypnospace Outlaw, I don't know what you'd do. I don't know how you would do that. I don't know how a demo of that game would work,
That's fair. That's such a weird Hypnospace Outlaw, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, it's basically a fictionalized internet browser that you were supposed to curate. It's an incredibly unique and super bizarre game, but it's really rad.
Yeah. So like, I don't even know how you do demo that. So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, like on paper, producing a demo seems like the right thing to do each and every time, but it kind of isn't. And it also is something like, you never know. If you have something like a Balatro where the core loop is very easy to pick up and understand, like that makes perfect sense. But by the time I was done with my first run of Balatro, I was like, yep, I get it. Like I know what this game is. It makes perfect sense. I'm in. But then there are some games that take like a longer burn than that, so I don't know. It's a very, I think, case by case basis on if it's worth it or not. Another layer to that is Nintendo in particular is very difficult to work with when it comes to that kind of thing. We've heard all kinds of stories about people who submit their game for lot check on Nintendo's eShop and it takes weeks or months, to actually get listed onto the eShop properly. It takes a long time. So
not for some of those H-word games, I think. They're showing up every other day.
Yeah, well, like, and those things, they're just churning those out and they're just like throwing them in there and seeing what happens, I think. But like there have been many situations where games have had to like suffer like delays literally because it's like it's not listed on the eShop yet. We submitted it, so that also happens. That's also a factor. And and then you have all this other stuff where you got to worry about how different ratings boards in different countries are going to perceive your game too.
I mean, that's something.
Suffered that.
Yeah, was taken down in the European eShops, which I do
gambling?
wonder. Yeah, because they thought that it included gambling because the filter through the way that you created these
like a
different
video poker.
Yeah,
thing.
it was video poker, so they just immediately thought it was promoting gambling. But I do wonder if all the stories that came out about that didn't wind up increasing the profile of Balatro and leading to even more sales.
Maybe.
I do wonder about that. But but when it comes to even just getting games listed for so many independent developers, I mean, this isn't something that any of the big companies need to worry about. This isn't something that Nintendo or Sony or Microsoft or Square Enix or Bandai Namco need to worry about. But if you are a small independent developer trying to find the right publisher to bring your game to market, you do have to be very careful, because we have spoken to independent developers who've given us some horror stories about dealing with publishers, and who have, the game, and I don't know, I hesitate to get into specifics, but long story short, the publisher themselves winds up becoming kind of ruining the entire experience for many of these developers.
You hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Publishers mess over small developers all the time. You hear horror stories like that too. So yeah, it's a whole thing. Like, so even submitting a demo to the Nintendo Switch eShop is its own headache. It's why like you'll hear of a game getting a patch on PC and then it comes out like a month later on Switch. That's why that happens. That's why you don't have your Stardew Valley 1.6. You have to do all these little optimizations, and you have to release it when you're able to release it, and then you have to also wait for it to be approved on the platform holder.
Sacrifice the blood of a virgin and all that. It's a whole thing.
Well, and there's even further stuff. Stephanie's a good example of this. Sony has this weird thing where they will not allow games with mentions of Taiwan on their eShop, on their PlayStation Store. So Stephanie, which is a game that has a lot of Taiwanese, like reference and Taiwanese characters in their game, they had to like change dialogue and stuff to list their game on PlayStation. Like there's stories about Last Stand Media. They released a couple of games that had mentions of Taiwan. They had to change that text in the game to list it on PlayStation, because they don't want to upset like the like Chinese government or something like that. They don't want to run into any issues publishing their games in China. So very weird, like little teeny tiny things that like you wouldn't think are factors of listing your independent game on an eShop that are.
Yeah.
And it's weird stuff like that, man.
And almost exclusively issues just for independent games and developers.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's just so weird to hear things like that, because I'm just thinking of the eShop and just the shovelware that's on there.
Yeah.
Like how does that? I did see something that there is. I guess there is some sort of review process that Nintendo has.
It's very lax.
I was about to say.
Yeah, I wish.
Review process is basically just like, does this thumbnail contain nudity? No. All right, throw it up there.
I wish they would have a more strict review process or some sort of ratings process, because I do think a lot of these indie games on the eShop get buried under all this garbage.
That is a conversation that we've also had with many independent developers. It's just the saturation, just the sheer amount of indie games. I said at the beginning that we could point you toward 50 billion other games. There are so many games, and genuinely, admittedly, many of them are quality titles. But yes, there is a great many games on the Nintendo Switch that I would definitely tell you are not going to be worth your time or money, and trying to wade through everything can in it itself be an incredible challenge. And that's one of the reasons that Seth and I are so dedicated to kind of doing what we do and finding these incredibly talented, incredibly dedicated independent developers who genuinely want to make a special experience for people. And we do our best to try to highlight games like that each and every week. So they hopefully they're doing their own marketing. We do what we can. Hopefully Nintendo sees a lot of the diamonds in the rough, and they put them in the Indie World Showcase. So there are a lot of people out there trying to cultivate the lists of recommendable independent games out there. But yeah, there's like genuinely like 10 games a day come out on the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, trying to look through all of it and find out what games are going to be worth your disposable income, because you only have so much of it, trying to figure out what games you want to spend your video game budget on. Yeah, I can completely understand if people find that daunting.
Ironically, like something where you get curation is not on the eShop itself. It is in like the indie worlds and stuff. That's where curation comes in. That's when there is somebody looking at that stuff and like actually vetting the content that gets into those things. You're not seeing the H word games in your Indie World showcase, right?
Right.
So there is that. Another kind of interesting thing is like people have kind of adopted these interesting little workarounds that are also kind of like marketing for their game. Another common tactic is games will just be on sale. They'll just put it on sale. Like it just, how many games do you see up for pre-order on the eShop that have like a 10% launch window discount or something, right? That's not even necessarily to get you enticed to buy it. It's so that it can be on the great deals page, you know, and it's not going to get buried under everything else. There's a game, there's an indie game that I really like. It's called Luca Born of a Dream. They released a sequel a couple of months ago called Death of a Wish that is just on perpetual sale. Like if you look at it on the eShop, it's like on sale for the next 360 something days. Like it's just on sale forever, because that means, and it's only like $2 off, but that just means that it's going to sit there on the sale page for any, and you're that much more likely to stumble across it, you know, on the sale page. So it's
That's why all the H word games are on sale. You know, they're always on sale.
Yeah. And they'll mark it down like 99 cents or whatever, because there are people who will go on there and just like sort lowest price first, you know, and they just go from there. So like that's a way to try to get yourself a little bit of visibility, you know.
I do think Nintendo tries, you know, they have on the featured page, they have like the hidden gems or short games or, you know, great deals or whatever. And I don't know if the other platforms really do that. I think Nintendo is more willing to like put them.
I've seen similar things on my PlayStation 5.
Okay.
Yeah, Xbox does like they're next week they're doing like the ID at Xbox showcase and stuff. I mean,
Silksong's gonna be there.
we'll see, right?
Eventually, somebody has to be right with a prediction like that.
Well, it's on
Maybe
Game Pass.
you,
It's coming to Game Pass day one, so
Yeah,
Shadow
who
dropping
knows?
next week.
Who knows? And that's a whole other can of worms too, right? Is like there's all this like, do they have a marketing deal with Microsoft now? And like, how did things shift over the course of development? It's like all this crazy stuff. It's it's really interesting to see like these little ways that people are trying to figure out how to best market their game. And I don't know if anybody has like the like solid
magic
answer.
bullet.
Yeah, there's no secret sauce, because again, you can do everything right, make all the right moves, and still people are just now finding out about your game, you know, 2.5 years later. So it's interesting, man. It's a weird little thing, and it makes it interesting and difficult as content creators to figure out kind of how to approach that thing. But that's part of, like you asked all the way at the beginning of the podcast, like how do you keep it like fresh for yourself? That's a huge part of it. For me is like yeah, like I do take that sort of job seriously of like, you know, propping up these people who put their blood, sweat, and tears into these games in most cases. I mean, these people in some cases put everything they have into these games. Like they're so passionate about their art that they're willing to bank everything on it in an industry and in a world where like it could not be stupider to do so. You know, like they're just jumping into the deep end with no floaties, where you could see extreme success. Stardew Valley's made by one dude, you know, like, and that's one of the biggest games on the planet, made by one dude.
Yeah.
But
and then, like
that
you
is
said,
the exception.
Something
right?
like Suika Game, you know, catches lightning in a bottle. Similarly, so I mean, you do have those instances, but yeah, for many people, they'll be incredibly talented. They'll have, you know, all the right ideas. They'll have a really quality product there. They'll market to the best of their abilities, and then it doesn't go their way. So we try to help where we can, but you know, we try to spread the good word of independent games as much as we can. Independent games are a massive part of the DNA of All In and have been since day one. So if you have any questions about any indie games, you know, feel free to reach out to us with those. Come over. We have an amazing Discord community. We have specifically like indie chat channels in our Discord. So like if independent games are something you're interested in and you want to learn more about, there are ways out there to do that.
Well, yeah, and I was going to ask you guys kind of on that question or on that thought is if there's people that are wanting to do what it is that you guys do or wanting to get more into indie games, do you have recommendations of other channels that they should be looking at, accounts, or like, I mean, Seth, it was incredible listening to you on Nintendo Drive the day before the Indie World Showcase, and you're like, oh, I really hope that we see Little Kitty Big City. I think Anton Blast would be cool, and like you just kind of nailed it. But that's because you guys both have the knowledge about indie games, and there may be games that were announced in a Indie World Showcase long ago or whatever, but you guys still remember it and are hoping to see it again. And then there's people who are like, oh yeah, I think I remember them announcing that game. Like, how are people able to just stay up to date, I guess, on what's coming up, or developers, or what's your advice for those that are just super interested in indie games?
Listen to All In.
No, I mean,
Would be
that's
it.
true. It's
well,
true.
I mean, whenever, like, there's so many different independent game showcases out there. We've already mentioned the Day of the Devs. We've already mentioned the Wholesome Games Direct and the Triple I Initiative, and even for different genres of games, there was that really, really cool like indie horror games showcase last year, and there's like a lot of indie fighting games that I'm following that are kind of working on their own showcase. But whenever one of those presentations, one of those directs, one of those indie showcases happens, that always winds up being a big part of what we do that week for the podcast.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I'll also say too, like when it comes to like how do you possibly keep up with all this stuff? I mean, it's because we're a Nintendo podcast and a Nintendo focused media network or whatever, but we like indies are even more, I would say, a part of like the DNA of what we do than even Nintendo is. Like, we cover stuff that's on the Switch or is like coming to the Switch or whatever, and we have like the Nintendo focus, but like indies are, I mean, just such a massive, like Eric said, since day one, our first episode, we've had an indie showcase, and like that's something we're very passionate about. And so like when you've ingrained it so much into what you're doing every day, you almost can't help but, like it almost just comes from like osmosis or something. Like, there's not a day that goes by where I'm not either emailing somebody about a game coming out or like communicating with PR reps or contacts that we've made over the years. Like there's not a day that goes by where I'm not doing something on that front. It's a massive part of my job, and like curating the kind of stuff that we're going to cover on our channel and on our podcast. It's a huge part of what we do.
Yeah. And in that same vein, I spend literally hours every day on social media trying to follow breadcrumbs, mentions, and, just little things here and there. Obviously, we follow so many independent creators, so many independent developers and studios and publishers and all that, but I'm always looking for mentions or images or any type of content that could lead us to new and interesting games. That's how I first found out about it's kind of been forgotten by and large, but this really interesting kind of stop motion looking game called Vocabulantis. I remember just kind of stumbling upon that and going down this massive rabbit hole. Like, my God, this game looks amazing. I can't wait for that to come out. Too bad we haven't heard anything in a while, but I'm still really waiting for it. But yeah, I spend so much time just kind of researching, trying to discover things that we may want to check out, that we may want to look deeper into, that we may want to even feature on the show.
It's amazing what you can find and accomplish if you focus on it. Like if you make that like your focus, if that is like a core pillar of what it is that you do, it's amazing what you can find. Like it's so ingrained into what we do with All In every single day that like it's like at a certain point it becomes like breathing. Like I don't even like covering indie games is just like that's the bread and butter. Like that's what it is, And so like when you get to that place, like it's just a natural byproduct of like your day-to-day life or your content consumption as a consumer of content, So if you're interested in indie games, like the answer is to get interested in indie games. Like, be about it. Get into it. You know, look up what these showcases are, listen to podcasts and follow channels that are into that sort of thing. There are, you know, even though we don't really brand ourselves specifically as like, hey, all in an indie podcast or whatever, there are a lot of podcasts that do. 6-1 Indie is a good example of it. You know, there are a lot of people who are like spotlighting indie games specifically, as well. So like there are a lot of outlets, not just us, that that you could look to for that. But like the TLDR of like how to get more involved with independent gaming and to learn more about independent gaming is to just seek it out, focus, and you know, make that part of your sort of bread and butter, part of your gaming diet.
And even if you just want to be like hyper focused, if you are one of those truly refined people of culture and good taste that just want to play pixelated 2D platformers, then you know you can hyper focus on searching for stuff like that. If you're not interested in visual novels or RPGs or whatever, you just want to like, hey, I remember playing, you know, these awesome, you know, 16-bit 2D platformers back when I was a kid. I want to try to find a few of those. You can hyper focus on that too. And there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of lists and video essays that will deal directly just with that. If you want to look just for Metroidvania games or horror games, there are people out there creating really good summations of indie games that kind of fit that bill.
Yep.
That's awesome. I mean, I just know that Johnny and I are super grateful for you guys and all the work that you do. It does not go unnoticed. So I hope you know that. And
Namaste.
Just all the love that you guys have for just gaming in general. So I know we couldn't think of anybody better to have on the show tonight and to talk about this. So thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Go ahead, Eric. Go for it.
Well, you can follow us on Twitter at All In Podcast, on Facebook at All In Podcast. You can also, like I said, join our amazing Discord community. We would love to have you over there. Also, make sure to check out our brand new website, allin.media, full of a ton new merch in honor of our episode 200. You can also find our newest show, Bit Harmony, there. We also have a YouTube channel, All In, or youtube.com/All In Podcast, where we are constantly posting both, you know, our news roundups, where we very often talk about indie games. We have a ton of first looks at indie games and demos, a ton of content available there. We also have at Patreon, where we do a ton of exclusive content for our patrons.
Yeah, we do a lot of stuff, y'all. We do like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's All In. If you search All In Podcast, you should find us. At All In Podcast on all the social stuff. Eric on Twitter or X or whatever is allin_Eric. I'm a $2 hero on there. You can also catch me on Carpool Gaming, the Nintendo Drive, and Bit Harmony. So we keep Nintendo weird occasionally. I still do that from time to time, but yeah, we do a lot of stuff. So thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah. Hope you didn't mind that dig about 2D platformers a few minutes ago, Johnny.
Oh, I like 2D platformers. I just like them to be longer than 4 hours.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Johnny Bo everywhere. Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and the Nintendo Powercast. I will be coming back to streaming this week, I think on Twitch. Finally, hopefully. We'll see.
And you can find me on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Communication Error Podcast, the podcast that you're listening to. I meant to say Nintendo Powercast. Cheesy C64, CHEEZYC 64. Johnny, close us out. What you got?
Go Sixers.